Want to welcome you to Phoenix. Yeah. Actually, most people maybe think that it's all people from Phoenix here, but actually we have people from 15 states that have flown in. So, yeah, it's a big hand. And if you don't know who I am, and that's very possible, my name's Doug French. I'm the president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, but more importantly, I'm the MC for today's events. Now, I wanted to point out a couple of things. When you registered, this fine book by Henry Hazlitt, The Inflation Crisis and How to Resolve It, is provided to us by our sponsor today. And so please give him a big hand, Mr. Jim Rodney. We also have another giveaway from another donor of ours, Mr. Lou Carabini, a little book he wrote called Inclined to Liberty. This is a nice little book. I urge you to take it home and give it a read. It's a nice book to pass on to friends who haven't quite found the freedom message. They can't quite figure it out. This book can help them in that regard. Now, just because we're giving you a couple books doesn't mean we wouldn't like you to buy a couple books from us. We have a table full of them out there, so please find the bookstore and buy early and buy often. Now, I suppose most of you know what the Ludwig von Mises Institute is, but always at these events, I find people who've been drugged here against their will. They were misled. They thought they were doing something completely different. Hey, we're going to go to a hotel Saturday afternoon. It's going to be like a spa day. You know, you're going to love this. They get stuck here listening to, talks about economics. But the Ludwig von Mises Institute was started in 1982 by our founder, Lew Rockwell, and we've really become the center for classic liberalism, libertarian political theory, and of course, the Austrian School of Economics. So it's really a worldwide movement. We're at the center of it, and it's terribly gratifying to be a part of it. In that regard, we have a number of students here. And if I could have those students stand, please. And I think I'm looking at them because these people all look young. Yes. All right. So these are students, we have 24 students from 14 colleges, all the way from a couple kids being homeschooled to the University of Notre Dame, and even someone from the University of Liverpool, which sounds pretty darn exotic to me, but everything in between. So not everybody, not all our students are out there studying Marxism, Keynesism. They're here. And they're here to learn about the economics of freedom. So it's always great to have students here, and by you paying to attend today allows us to invite students here. In regards to helping us in our programs, you'll see a card on your table where we invite you to become members or supporters of the Institute. And so if you choose to, if you like what you hear today, don't know anything about us, but want to become involved, please do. And with contribution today, and today only, you will receive this book, Reassessing the Presidency. And so please sign up. We have one of the authors here, Tom DiLorenzo. He actually has 2 essays in this book. So he could sign this for you if you would sign up today. So please think about that. We're not supported by any big foundations. It's just working people, entrepreneurs like you that keep the lights on for us and allow us to do these kind of things. We also have started something at these events. We have a sign-up sheet. A lot of people think they're out in the wilderness all by themselves thinking about freedom. Then they come to an event like this and they say, gee, there's lots of people that feel just the way I do. And they want to exchange names, they want to exchange email addresses. So we help facilitate that. So we have a sign-up sheet for your email addresses. We don't give them to anybody. We don't sell them to anybody. And believe me, there's people that want them. We just give them to the people who signed up and allow them to work together in their local either activism, or if they want to get together and meet and talk about Austrian economics, we just do that to help them out. Also, I want to introduce James Fogel, who is here. If he would stand. He's our development director at the Institute, and for those of you who would like to disinherit Uncle Sam and want to know how to do that, James is the guy to talk to. So please corner him during the course of the day if you want to talk about something like that. And with that, it is time to get the program going. As you notice from your program, I am the warm-up act, and so we will proceed in that direction. And I'm going to talk about two central bankers, one of which I think you know, and one of which I don't think you know a whole lot about. And I think if you follow economic affairs at all, you know who Ben Bernanke is. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was Time's 2009 Man of the Year. CBS News said he may be the most important Federal Reserve chairman in history when Scott Pelley interviewed him for 60 Minutes last year. You know, Bernanke's an expert on the Great Depression. We've been told that time and time again. And he famously said back in 2002, but the U.S. government has a technology called a printing press, or today its electronic equivalent, that allows it to produce as many U.S. dollars as it wishes at essentially no cost. By increasing the number of U.S. dollars in circulation, or even by credibly threatening to do so, the U.S. government can also reduce the value of the dollar in terms of goods and services, which is equivalent to raising the price in dollars of these goods and services. We conclude that under a paper money system, a determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. But while Helicopter Ben is considered the great inflator, he's no match for Gideon Gono. Gideon Gono is the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. So Bernanke may have been named Man of the Year in 2009. Gono was awarded the Ig Nobel Prize in 2009 for giving people a simple, everyday way to cope with a wide range of numbers by having his bank print notes with denominations ranging from 1 cent to 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. The aim of the Ig Nobels is to honor achievements that first make people laugh and then make them think. But don't think Gono's lacking for self-esteem. When he was interviewed by Newsweek in 2009 and asked if he viewed his term as Reserve Governor a success, Gono responded, "I am modestly credited with the survival strategy of my country." On the other hand, Mr. Bernanke can count on his friends to sing his praises. I shudder to think what the world would be like if Ben hadn't been running the Fed. Former Secretary Hank Paulson says, it's just hard to explain that, yes, we're in deep doo-doo, but we would have been in much deeper doo-doo. Now, Mr. Gono's a relatively young man, 50 years old, started his career at national breweries. He joined the Zimbabwe Fertilizer Corporation when he was a young man. I don't know if that's significant, maybe. And then he went on into banking which is a natural progression, of course, with Zimbank, which is operated, of course, by the government. He then went to the commercial bank of Zimbabwe, and he became Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe's personal banker. He was appointed to head the University of Zimbabwe Council. He was granted an honorary degree, and Gono has a doctorate in strategic management from Atlantic International University after beginning his secondary education at Rapid Rewards College. So for those of you wanting to get into central banking, you may want to start your career at Rapid Rewards. Meanwhile, Mr. Bernanke, on the other hand, has a doctorate degree from MIT, and he studied at Harvard. Now, both central bankers embraced their humble beginnings. Gono told Newsweek, "I owe a lot of my character and who I am today from my humble background. I was poor. I got to start making tea and keeping house. I'm a normal guy. I miss going to the supermarket." Bernanke grew up in a small town in Dillon, South Carolina, and he emphasizes his Main Street middle-class roots. And his wife still makes him do the dishes and take out the trash, according to Time. And while Bernanke wears off-rack suits, owns a pretty nice four-bedroom townhome in Washington, D.C. that he paid $839,000 for, his counterpart Gono lives in the richest suburb of Harare, Borrowdale Brook, in a 47-bedroom house down the street from President Mugabe's place. Now, the Gono residence, in addition to having as many rooms as a small hotel, has a glass swimming pool, a mini theater, landscaped gardens, and a gym larger than many of the houses in Zimbabwe's capital city. Gono also owns numerous farms that were, of course, confiscated by the Mugabe government. One is near Norton, which, when the seasonal weather is dry, it draws clean water from a 25-mile-long pipeline linked to a reservoir. Now, this is water that's supposed to supply water to the people of Harare. Gono also owns property in Malaysia. On the other hand, Chairman Bernanke lives a relatively modest lifestyle. He and his wife reportedly just own a Ford Focus for an automobile, while Governor Gono glides around in a 12-cylinder Mercedes-Benz. So Gono would seem to be doing much better than Bernanke, who lives on a salary of less than $200,000. But Bernanke's employer, the Federal Reserve, is making money like they were printing the stuff. Last year, America's central bank made $52.1 billion, the highest in its 96-year history. The central bank made over $30 billion in each of the previous 2 years, after making $29 billion in 2006. This shows that central banking is a great business to be in, especially in a crisis, said former Fed official Vincent Reinhart to the Washington Post. You buy assets that have a nice yield and your cost of funds is very low. The difference is profit. Low cost of funds, well, I guess. Reinhart leaves out that part about creating money out of nowhere to buy these assets. And while it's the Zimbabwean way for the head banker to take the central bank largesse for himself and build a private palace, in America, the central bank builds work palaces for its economists around the country. Now, before Gono moved into his place, he had extra security sensors that were installed on the outside perimeter, biometric iris recognition on the inside of his place, and fingerprint authentication systems were also fitted in the interior. But he still wasn't sure it was secure enough. By the way, the security at America's central bank locations is equally as tight. Now, we have to be fair to Mr. Gono. Things weren't exactly great in Zimbabwe when he took over in 2003. At the time, the annual inflation rate in that country was 619%. In an interview with Before Ankoma with New African in the fall of 2007, with his country's inflation rate at 4,500%, Gono blamed the high inflation on the differences that Zimbabwe had with its former colonial master, the UK, and added, "We are busy laying the foundations for a serious deceleration program." But the Gono deceleration program didn't end up being all that serious. By the end of 2008, the inflation rate exceeded 231 million%. And at the time, the Times Online wrote, a police inspector's Christmas bonus last week was worth 1 American cent in the widely used parallel black market. So while Bernanke is worshipped in the US, the Zimbabwean people have been angry with Gono, even resorting to throwing rocks at the Reserve Bank building. And many in the rock-throwing mob were low-grade civil servants, such as prison staff who had been trying to get money for Christmas, only to find that the banks had run out of cash despite introducing just that morning new $1 billion, $5 billion, and $10 billion Zimbabwe dollar notes. Now, Gono believes that there is a, quote, positive correlation between the drought and inflation. And he pointed out in his 2007 New African interview that the droughts have become more frequent. Instead of a drought every 10 years, the drought has persisted through much of the early 2000s and mid-2000s. Those aspects have got a serious bearing on our inflation level, Gono said. So forget about money printing. Inflation's all about the weather, lack of support from other nations, political sanctions. In Governor Gono's mind, he's had nothing to do with the hyperinflation in his country. No other central bank governor has had to deal with the kind of inflation levels I have, Gono told Newsweek. The people at my bank are at the cutting edge of the country. But Ludwig von Mises anticipated Gono's claims years ago in a book called Economic Policy. The most important thing to remember is that inflation is not an act of God, Mises wrote. That inflation is not a catastrophe of elements or a disease that comes like the plague. Inflation is policy. Now, Mr. Bernanke also feels his central bank has nothing to do with inflation. When he was interviewed by 60 Minutes, he said, well, the Fed is an institution that people don't hear so much about, but it's a very important one. It manages monetary policy for the country. It's one of the main tools we have for stabilizing our economy and keeping prices stable. Reminds me of Murray Rothbard, who quipped in his book, The Case Against the Fed. Murray wrote, the culprit solely responsible for inflation, the Federal Reserve, is continually engaged in raising a hue and cry about inflation, for which everyone else in society seems to be responsible. What we are seeing is the old ploy by the robber who starts out shouting, "Stop, thief," and runs down the street pointing ahead at others. So you need dams and irrigation equipment? But of course the citizenry has not saved and accumulated capital because what they did save was confiscated by the government directly or inflated away. Well, Governor Gono has the answer. We are printing money to build dams and buy irrigation equipment, he explains. Combine that infrastructure and the abounding energy of our people to succeed, and you have the makings of an agricultural revolution that is bound to take us to levels not seen in our living memory. But Zimbabwe already had an agricultural revolution. It was once one of Southern Africa's most prosperous countries. It was referred to as the breadbasket of Africa. Its Victoria Falls is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. The Zambezi River boasts abundant wildlife and pulsing rapids. The country's lush soils, the envy of all of Africa. The country is said to hold 80% of the world's platinum deposits, and it also has huge natural gas resources. And along with natural gas and other commodities. The Zimbabwe population has a literacy rate exceeding 90%. So what happened? Well, committed Marxist Robert Mugabe took over in Zimbabwe in 1980. And besides running the printing presses, Mugabe and the Zimbabwe parliament pushed through an amendment to their constitution allowing for the seizure of white-owned farmland, despite voters turning the measure down just 2 months prior. Now, the country that for many years was a major food exporter to the region has a quarter of its citizens dependent on international food relief. And while Gono blames the heavens for being stingy with rain, an all-parliamentary committee warned before the start of the rainy season that production would be at an all-time low due to shortages of diesel, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, functioning farm machinery, and skilled labor. Printing money with more zeros will not increase production. It's just the opposite. But Gono looks to America for inspiration. Look at the bridges across the many rivers in New York and elsewhere, Gono says, and the other infrastructure in the country that was built with high budget deficits. These are times when it is necessary to dig deeper and construct and reconstruct. Therefore, printing money to sustain lives, to build infrastructure and a springboard from which to leap forward cannot be bad, Gono said. Now that sounds familiar. That's what the financial rescue of 2008 and 2009 was all about, right? Sustaining lives, especially those on Wall Street and in Detroit, and providing a springboard for consumption, spending on shovel-ready infrastructure and hiring census workers and all of that. And Bernanke's been celebrated for pulling the American economy back from the edge of the abyss with a massive expansion of its balance sheet and interest rates just north of zero. And now Washington and the Federal Reserve believe they can cure what ails American economy and the speculative binge that caused the financial meltdown with stringent regulation. That's what's needed. The London Times reports that in his pugnacious lunchtime speech in January, President Obama introduced a sweeping series of measures aimed at checking the behavior of banks, which will be the biggest regulatory crackdown on banks since the 1930s. Yes, the authorities in Zimbabwe have also been cracking down. There is a very high level of indiscipline and corruption in the Zimbabwean economy, Gono told Newsweek. I would enact tougher legislation that would ensure offenders would never do it again. Gono went as far as closing down the Zimbabwean stock exchange in the November of 2008 and said a couple months later, unless there is more discipline and honor, the exchange will stay closed. I can't be bothered. I don't know when it will open. And then Governor Gono commissioned a study. And you won't believe what this study found. The stock market has been traditionally one of the drivers behind Zimbabwe's hyperinflation. The stock market opened again in February 2009, but trading's been thin and only in US dollars. One Zimbabwean businessman told the BBC, I don't even know if I'll have a job at the end of the week because there is so much uncertainty. There are so many companies closing down. It is quite interesting to see people going in banks with bags and sometimes even suitcases. You know that there are large amounts of money in there, which unfortunately will not buy very much. The things we buy, the groceries at home, the things that we get for our children, we have to buy immediately, as soon as we get the money, according to one woman. We know that if we wait, the prices are going to go up again. If we wait another week, we will not be able to afford anything. Now, as I said before, we're repeatedly reminded that Ben Bernanke is the foremost expert on the Great Depression. And he told 60 Minutes, the Depression was an incredibly dramatic episode, an era of stock market crashes, breadlines, bank runs, and wild currency speculation. With the storm clouds of war gathering ominously in the background. For my money, he said, few periods are so replete with human interest. Bernanke believes that the Federal Reserve was too tight back then with monetary policy, making matters worse. Create more money and save failing banks. That's his prescription. Bernanke's counterpart in Zimbabwe has studied the same history, and guess what? He's come to the same conclusion. I'm a student of economic histories of countries, and I can tell you that what we are doing is not unique, Gono told New African. If you study carefully the history of the American economy, if you look at Chinese history, if you look at Russian history, British history, and others, you will find that at some point they had to rely on their central banks. Bill Bonner wrote recently in the Daily Reckoning, several countries are already past the point of no return. Even if America taxed 100% of all household wealth, it would not be enough to put its balance sheet in the black. And Professors Kenneth Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart show that when external debt passes 73% of GDP and 239% of exports, the result is default, hyperinflation, or both. IMF data shows the U.S. already too far gone on both scores, with external debt of 96% GDP, 748% of exports. To ensure that my people survive, I had to print money, Gono told Newsweek. I found myself doing extraordinary things that aren't in the textbooks. Then the IMF asked the U.S. to please print money. The whole world is now practicing what they have been saying I should not. I decided that God has been on my side and had come to vindicate me. Well, Governor Gono may have God on his side while doing extraordinary things, but Chairman Bernanke has President Obama on his. When announcing the Fed chairman's reappointment, the president cited Bernanke's background, his temperament, his courage, and his creativity. So you might ask, what is Zimbabwe's inflation rate these days? Well, it's hard to know. But Steve Hanke, professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, reports that as of November 14th, 2008, Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate was 89.7 sextillion%. That's a daily rate of 98%, with prices doubling every 24.7 hours. Since then, Hanke's not been able to update his index because the price data from Zimbabwe has deteriorated and is unreliable. But imagine for a second, you save your whole life, you delay consumption, you save money to send your kids to college, your grandkids to college, live a comfortable life, and have the government inflate it away in 24 hours. Cut it in half in 24 hours. Cut it in half again in the next 24 hours. It's extraordinary what's going on. So helicopter Ben's policies haven't yet produced the kind of price inflation numbers that Mr. Gono's policy have, but there's still time. According to our government's numbers, prices are going nowhere. But John Williams' numbers at shadowstats.com reveal that prices are rising at a 9.4% annual clip, despite the recession. Well, Mr. Gono's quotes, of course, are laughable. But hopefully the point is made that inflation's no laughing matter, and hyperinflation is downright tragic. No other tool other than war can completely destroy an economy like inflation. Zimbabwe is living proof, happening right here, right now, in our lifetimes. And yet it's America's central bank that in many ways has served as the inspiration for Zimbabwean policies. The great Henry Hazlitt wrote, "Inflation is a twisted magnifying lens through which everything is confused, distorted, and out of focus, so that few men are any longer able to see realities in their true proportions." No two men are more confused and out of focus than Chairman Bernanke and Governor Gono. Thank you.